We whose journeys are always just beginning, whose mission always awaits us, whose vision are bent on loving, we gather together in this morning. We gather as a community drawn together out of a common need, each toting our own carpet bag of treasures and dreams. We gather together seeking our own meanings, yearning for life in all its dimensions, as it challenges and expands, as it burdens, as it consoles, as it heals. We gather in these moments to drink from a common cup. We gather together with questions, the kind of questions that provoke us to the path of action. We gather with hope, the kind of hope that pulses on through uncertainty. We gather with tenderness, the kind of tenderness that can only be born from knowing both imperfection and earnest effort. We gather together in openness, an openness that is wakeful to the possibilities and equally discerning and gentle in its judgments. We gather then unbounded, but close. We gather thirsting. We gather drawn to our source. Whoever you are and wherever you are on your life's journey, you are welcome to accompany us in our gathering today. Come, let us worship together.
Well, good morning. Do you guys know what we're going to do today in RE? We're taking a field trip in our RE class today. You did? Is that why you came? Oh, cool. We are going to go help out our neighbors and help take part in a volunteer day in their garden today. So we'll be off to that in a moment. But before we do that, we have a story today called Old Turtle. Do you know what the adults are going to be talking about today? Turtles? Not quite. The adults today are going to be talking about God and how people talk about God and what we call God. That's okay. That's okay. And that's part of the reason why we're here. We talk about these things so people can decide what they believe. And Unitarians believe there are many ways to think about God, right? Okay, so we're going to hear a story, and this story is called Old Turtle. And you can tell me when we walk to the garden what you think about it, okay? Once, long, long ago, yet somehow not so very long, when all the animals and rocks and winds and waters and trees and birds and fish and all the beings of the world could speak and understand one another, there began an argument. It began softly at first, quiet as the first breeze that whispered, "He is a wind who is never still." Quiet as the stone that answered, "He is great rock that never moves." Gentle as the mountain that rumbled, God is a snowy peak high above the clouds. And the fish in the ocean that answered, God is a swimmer in the dark blue depths of the sea. "No," said the star, "God is twinkling and shining far, far away." "No," replied the ant, "God is a sound and a smell and a feeling who is very, very close." Yeah. "God," insisted the antelope, "is a runner swift and free who loves to leap and race with the wind." "She is a great tree," murmured the willow, "a part of the world, always growing and always giving." "You are wrong," argued the island. "God is separate and apart." God is like the shining sun far above all things, added the blue sky. No, he is a river who flows through the very heart of things, thundered the waterfall. She is a hunter, roared the lion. God is gentle, chirped the robin. He is powerful, growled the bear. And the argument grew louder and louder and louder until... Stop. A new voice spoke. It rumbled loudly like thunder, and it whispered softly like butterfly sneezes. The voice seemed to come from... Why, it seemed to come from... Old Turtle. Old Turtle hardly ever said anything and certainly never argued about God. But now Old Turtle began to speak. God is indeed deep, she said to the fish in the sea, and much higher than high, she told the mountains. He is swift and free as the wind, and still and solid as a great rock, she said to the breezes and stones. She is the life of the world, Turtle said to the willow, always close by, yet beyond the furthest twinkling light, she told the ant and the star. God is gentle and powerful, above all things and within all things. God is all that we dream of and all that we seek, said Old Turtle, all that we come from and all that we can find. God is. Old Turtle had never said so much before. All the beings of the world were surprised and became very quiet, but Old Turtle had one more thing to say. There will soon be a family of beings in the world, she said, and they will be strange and wonderful, and they will be reminders of all that God is. They will come in many different colors and shapes, with different faces and different ways of speaking, and our thoughts will soar to the stars, but their feet will walk on earth. They will possess many powers, they will be strong yet tender, a message of love from God to the earth, and a prayer from the earth back to God. And the people came. But the people forgot. They forgot that they were a message of love and a prayer from the earth, and they began to argue about who knew God and who did not, and where God was and was not, and whether God was or was not. And often the people missed their powers and misused their powers and hurt one another, or even killed one another. And they hurt the earth until finally even the forests began to die, and the rivers and the oceans and the plants and the animals and the earth itself, because the people could not remember who they were or where God was. Until one day there came a voice like the growling of thunder, but as soft as butterfly sneezes. Please stop. The voice seemed to come from the mountain who rumbled, sometimes I see God swimming in the dark blue depths of the sea. And from the ocean who sighed, he is often among the snow-capped peaks reflecting the sun. And the stone who said, I sometimes feel her breath as she blows by. And from the breeze who whispered, I feel her still presence as I dance among the rocks. And the star declared, God is very close. And the island added, his love touches everything. And after a long, lonesome, and scary time, the people listened and began to hear and to see God in one another and in the beauty of all the earth. And Old Turtle smiled. And so did God. The end. All right. And if you all will sing us out to this little light of mine, we will be on our way down to the farm.
If you came here today expecting me to unlock the secret of whether or not God exists, you're in the wrong place. Nor will you hear me explain exactly why people are suddenly drinking green beer this weekend. These subjects are very large and full of mystery and wonder, and I am inadequate to address them completely. Still, of all the controversies among Unitarian and Universalists, surely the God question is significant and consequential. We ceaselessly ask, does God exist? And then we ask, does it make any difference to us here in this place? So this sermon is not about whether God exists or not. It's not about whether we believe in God or not. But it is about why the question of God keeps hanging around. Why the issue has not been settled by now. The Enlightenment was supposed to settle that question, for it was at that time that humanity, especially in Western culture, came into its own in regard to its own authority by way of its ability to reason and to create the world. According to our reason, God just doesn't make any sense. Since we learned how to think about these things, and since we elevated that ability to think of our own ultimate authority, we concluded that we don't need something outside of humanity to explain our reality. We can do that ourselves, thank you very much. Philosophers and theologians at the turn of the last century were projecting that God would be pretty much eliminated from the picture, especially in the Western world. God would be replaced by what was then called mankind as the center of all things. Nietzsche finally announced God's obituary, and it seemed many people were willing to accept the verdict. Yet, as we adventure along into this new century, the idea of God has been resuscitated and actually may be stronger than ever. America, the vanguard of humanist ideology, is the most religious country on the planet. Surveys show that a huge majority believe in God and in the Bible and in heaven and in prayer and in church attendance. When I tell people that I'm a Unitarian Universalist, they typically don't know what that means. I'm sure you've run into that. And as I tried to explain, they are wanting to respond to me, even though they're not understanding what I'm saying. And then they say, well, it really doesn't matter as long as you believe in God. And that does seem to be the definition of religion for most people in the world. But is that a definition? What is the bottom line about religion? What is religion all about? Over and over in my life, especially as a UU minister, I have responded to the question of God's existence by declaring that is not a good question. As a matter of fact, believing in God has little, if anything, to do with being a Unitarian Universalist. My listeners are always astonished at that statement, for to most people, God and religion are synonyms. This curious debate is not only between non-UUs and UUs, it's between UUs themselves. I've heard many of us question the existence of God while simultaneously questioning whether Unitarian Universalism even is a religion. That controversy flared up last year on the pages of our denominational magazine, the UU World. You may have remembered this little incident. On the inside cover is an advertisement for a group called Freedom from Religious Foundation. Freedom from Religion Foundation. And the byline says, quote, it is a 501c3 nonprofit, and by the way, they spelled profit P-R-O-P-H-E-T, a 503 501c3 nonprofit association of atheists and agnostics working since 1978 to keep church and state separate. And here are some of the signs in the ad, also designed to be placed in public places, including on buses and subways and other public places. These are some of the signs. Clarence Darrow, colon, I don't believe in God because I don't believe in Mother Goose. Butterfly McQueen, as my ancestors were freed from slavery, I am free from the slavery of religion. And then there's Mark Twain's country school boy quoted as saying, faith is when you believe something you know ain't true. When this issue of the UU World came out, there was a firestorm of anger over why the UU World accepted this ad, which obviously confuses the difference between religion and theism. The truth is, and I really believe this, the truth is Unitarian Universalism is a religion in the truest and most accurate sense of the word. Folks throughout the denomination who know that and who think of themselves as religious were outraged. And I am one of those folks. I personally believe that religion and God are not the same thing. And I'm dismayed to think that our denominational magazine would buy an ad from a group of people who does think they are synonyms. Subsequent issues of the UU World were filled with letters to the editor decrying the ad. And the whole brouhaha culminated when the editor-in-chief of the magazine wrote an apology for accepting the ad, since it was clearly misrepresentative of Unitarian Universalism. So, what is it that is representative of Unitarian Universalism? Why are we together? What are we doing? Is it because of our belief in God, or is it because of our disbelief in God? It must be said that many UUs think of themselves as atheists and agnostics, and we have many of them right here in this room today. That is, belief in God is not the defining element of being a Unitarian Universalist. And there are also many folks who think of themselves as theists and even as Christians. And all this diversity means that we as a religious movement cannot be defined theologically. Remember, theos is the Greek word for God. We cannot be defined theologically. It's not about God. Instead, our definition centers on something very different, but just as sacred and just as holy as a traditional image of God. And that is the covenant, which is a sacred agreement that we make with one another to live our lives in accordance with certain values, which are expressed in our principles and purposes statement. And if we believe anything, it is how people live that is vastly more important than what they believe. Deeds, not creeds, is the famous summation of this argument. So the issue is, how do we live our lives, not what do we believe? We actually encourage people to develop their own belief systems. I think our most successful UU adult religious education program is actually going on right now here at Live Oak, and it's called Building Your Own Theology. And in that class, we ask people to think about what they believe and know that it's something that is inside of them, and to explore that idea, and then finally write it down in what we call a credo at the end of the class, Credo is Latin for I believe. But notice it's I believe. It's not we believe, which is what traditional creeds say. So if you believe in God, even a personal God as in Jesus, then you are welcome to make that part of your personal belief system. If you do not find the concept of God helpful, you can say that out loud in your credo statement and you will be supported in this place, and that's because of the covenant that we have with one another to respect and honor each other as human beings and as believers or non-believers. As always, the words we use in all of this are important. One of the larger challenges that we liberal religious people face is to seek to understand what the words mean. What does the word atheist mean? Well, it's literally theos, that is, not God. The word agnostic is from the word Gnostic, which means knowledge, and agnostic means I don't know. And a theist, a Christian, a believer, a humanist, a skeptic, and then there's Unitarian Universalists. My great desire is that in this place, here at Live Oak, Unitarian Universalist congregation, that you can be a Christian UU. You can be a Jewish UU here. You can be a Buddhist. You can be a humanist. You can be an atheist. You can be an agnostic. You can be a skeptic. And you are welcome here, whoever you are and wherever you are on your life's journey. You are welcome here. You might guess, given my own theological background, that my patron saint is none other than Doubting Thomas. And we will learn more about Doubting Thomas in the Easter sermon this year. The point is trying to understand what it means to believe, and what it means to doubt, and what it means to be skeptical, and to think about these huge concepts even while encouraging one another to grow in our individual and collective understandings. The search for truth and meaning goes on in the liberal religious tradition. This is a very good thing for the long and winding road of our individual and communal life's journeys truly can find a home here in this place with these people. The reality of this discussion finally comes down to a basic equation: the relationship of what people believe and how it is that they affect our lives. So I would now like to offer a parable written by a famous man who described himself as an agnostic on good days, an atheist, and nothing on days when he was really depressed. And this parable is about the effects of believing in God or not believing in God, and the effects of how it is that you act according to your beliefs about these things. So, it's from Mark Twain. It's in a delightful collection of essays which he asked to be published after his death, because he knew people would be very stirred up about it. It was a group of letters from the devil, from Satan to the earth, and it was called The Damned Human Race. He allowed it to be published only after his death, and we must remember that this was written over 100 years ago, and the language is antiquated. even though in some instances it's actually appropriate. Man is the religious animal, Mark Twain writes. He is the only religious animal. He's the only animal that has the true religion, several of them. He's the only animal that loves his neighbor as himself and then cuts his throat if his theology isn't straight. He's made a graveyard of the globe in trying his honest best to smooth his brother's path to happiness in heaven. He was at this in the time of the Caesars. He was at this at the time of Mohammed. He was at this at the time of the Inquisition. He was at this at the time of Queen Mary in England. And he's been at it ever since he first saw the light. He's at it today in the Middle East, and he will be at it tomorrow somewhere else. The higher animals, and that was Twain's name for animals, the higher animals who are not human have no religion. And we are told that they're going to be left out in the hereafter. And I wonder why, Mark Twain asks. It seems questionable taste. In truth, man is incurably foolish. Some things which other animals easily learn, he is incapable of learning. Among my experiments was this. In an hour, I taught a cat and a dog to be friends. I put them in a cage. In another hour, I taught them to be friends with a rabbit. In the course of 2 days, I was able to add a fox, a goose, a squirrel, and some doves, and finally a monkey. And they all lived together in peace, even affectionately. Next, in another cage, I put an Irish Catholic from Tipperary. And as soon as he seemed tame enough, I added a Scotch Presbyterian from Aberdeen. Next, a Turk from Constantinople, a Greek Christian from Crete, an Armenian, a Methodist from the wilds of Arkansas, a Buddhist from China, a Brahmin from Benares, and finally a Salvation Army colonel from Wapping. Then I stayed away 2 whole days. And when I came back to note the results, the cage of higher animals, the dogs and cats and rabbits and birds, was all right. But in the other, there was a chaos of gory odds and ends of turbans and fezzes and plaids and bones and flesh. Not a specimen was left alive. These reasoning animals had disagreed on a theological detail and carried the matter to a higher court. Thus endeth the word from the prophet Mr. Clements. So let's look at another idea, and that is what we say we believe, we must also be responsible for. What is our responsibility as a consequence of our theology or non-theology? What is our personal and collective responsibility in regard to the apparent universal element of our human will to believe? What is our responsibility to live this way or that way? And there is a corollary part of this responsibility. Sometimes when we think about God, we don't think God is doing a very good job in taking responsibility of controlling things in the world. In fact, we're mad at our old-time God. We are angry because God did not turn out to be what everybody was saying, and that in fact God is often not a very nice guy at all. I remember a psychiatrist friend of mine explaining to me that the reason God doesn't have very many friends is because of the way God treats his friends. With friends like that, I remember the first time that I decided that if I were God, I would not act the way God does. You know, like sending people to hell forever and stuff like that. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever wondered, as William Sloane Coffin, one of the great ministers of the 20th century, wrote, why is it that God doesn't ever seem to be very Christ-like? We've chosen to say that God's existence is probably irrelevant, since we have the responsibility to do what we know we must do to confront the human condition. Some of us say, go ahead and think about God any way you wish. But there are other more important and relevant things to think about, namely to think about human beings and their existence and their welfare, and to think about humanity in its relationship with the cosmos, the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, and its existence and its welfare of humanity so far as we can influence it. We liberal religious people decided to be practical. There's a lot of work to be done, and we're tired of waiting for God or something outside ourselves to do it. So for many of us, the question of the existence of God is simply not the right question. In the meantime, we must go about the business of building the world in the best way we know we can. And it's our time now to go about the business of creation. It's our place now. It's our responsibility. And from that moment in time, we move on. And yet, we wonder, and yet we question, and yet we look into the world of mystery and wonder, and we say, this truly is an amazing world, an amazing universe that we live in. I invite you to watch the Cosmos series, which is a rebooting of the old Carl Sagan thing, is now on TV on Sunday nights, and as was so good with Carl Sagan, he is overwhelmed by the magnitude, the majesty, the wonder, and the glory of the universe itself. And we can live our lives in that respect and honor. On the other hand, and this is me, this is a personal thing with me, I was raised to believe that God was a person and that I could talk to God and that I could have a relationship with God personally. I don't believe that anymore, but sometimes I miss it. Sometimes I wish there was someone like that I could turn to. And as I was making my transition from being a born-again Christian who had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ to a Unitarian Universalist minister whose mind had been cracked wide open to say, we don't know, but we are looking and we are wondering and we are marveling at the universe and all that is in it. The transition was a difficult one for me, and it was about that time that there was a Broadway musical that came out, and it had a song in it which I took to be my theme song, and it's one of the most personal songs that I sing, and I would like to offer it to you as yet another way to think about